The heavy velvet curtains of the Kang ballroom muffled the sound of the storm outside, but they couldn't muffle the piercing, sharp-edged screams that shattered the gala. Thandiwe felt the air leave her lungs as So Young, the heiress to the Kang conglomerate, pointed a manicured finger directly at her chest. "You're a thief," the heiress shrieked, her voice echoing off the high marble ceilings. "I knew I couldn't trust a low-level servant like you in this house. Empty your pockets now." The music stopped instantly. 300 guests turned their heads in unison. Thandiwe stood frozen, her apron stained slightly from the kitchen work, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She wasn't just a maid. She was a mother, and the terrifying reality of what this accusation meant. Deportation, separation from her 3-year-old son, Lindo, hit her with the force of a physical blow. She looked at the security guards stepping forward, their expressions cold and devoid of empathy, and she knew she had seconds to find the words to save her life. "I have done nothing, Miss So Young," Thandiwe said, her voice trembling but miraculously audible in the dead silence. "I have worked in this home for 2 years with nothing but honesty. Please, check the cameras. Check everything." So Young didn't even blink. She walked down the steps of the dais, her silk gown rustling like dry leaves. "The cameras are off for the private auction, you fool," she hissed, leaning in close enough that Thandiwe could smell the expensive, cloying scent of her perfume. "And my grandmother's ring is gone from my vanity. You were in that room at 4 o'clock. Don't play the victim with me." A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. Thandiwe felt the stinging heat of tears in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She thought of Lindo, asleep in the staff wing, and the promise she had made to keep them safe. She couldn't break down. Not now. Not when the world was trying to crush her. The head of security reached for her arm, his grip bruising. Thandiwe pulled back slightly, her gaze locking onto the faces of the elite guests. They weren't looking at her with curiosity. They were looking at her as if she were dirt. "I am a mother," she said, her voice rising, finding a strength she didn't know she possessed. "I would never leave my child motherless for a piece of stone. I would never risk our future for something that doesn't belong to me. You are accusing a woman who has given her entire soul to this family." So Young laughed, a cold, jagged sound that sent shivers down Thandiwe's spine. "Soul? You think your soul matters to the law? Search her." The guards didn't hesitate. They shoved their hands into her pockets, the rough movement tearing the hem of her uniform. Thandiwe stood tall, ignoring the humiliation, her head held high, even as her internal world collapsed. Suddenly, a small, shuffling sound came from the shadows of the doorway. It was a rhythm she knew better than her own heartbeat. Lindo, in his oversized, faded pajamas, had wandered out of the nursery. He looked tiny, almost invisible against the vast, glittering backdrop of the ballroom. He blinked against the bright lights, his eyes scanning the room until they found his mother. He didn't run. He walked slowly, clutching his worn-out stuffed lion, his face etched with a confusion that mirrored the gravity of the room. He walked right past the security guards, who were too shocked to stop him, and stopped directly in front of the heiress. The room held its breath. So Young looked down at the toddler, her lip curling in disgust. "Get this brat away from me," she snapped. Lindo didn't look scared. He looked up at So Young with an unsettling, profound stillness. He reached out a small, chubby hand and touched the lace at the hem of her designer dress. Everyone watched, paralyzed. "You didn't lose it, lady," the little boy whispered, his voice small but perfectly clear in the silence. "You threw it in the trash bin in the kitchen when you thought nobody was looking. I saw you." It made a loud clink-clink sound. A shockwave of gasps rippled through the ballroom. So Young went deathly pale, her composure shattering like glass. Her eyes darted to the doors, to the security team, to the cameras that weren't recording. Thandiwe looked at her son, then at the heiress, the realization dawning on her with terrifying speed. So Young had planted the ring, panicked, and discarded the evidence in her haste to set the trap. The head of security stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the heiress. "Is this true, Miss So-young?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. So-young's contorted with rage. "He's a child. He's hallucinating. Don't listen to this peasant brat." She reached out to shove Lindo away, but before her hand could make contact, a tall, imposing figure stepped between them. It was Mr. Kang, the CEO, his face a mask of unreadable fury. He had been watching from the shadows of the VIP balcony. "That is enough," he said. His voice was quiet, but it commanded the room more than any shout. He turned to the security head. "Check the kitchen trash bin." Immediately, the guard moved with lightning speed, exiting the room. Thandiwe dropped to her knees and pulled Lindo into her arms, burying her face in his neck, shaking with relief and terror. The room remained deathly still, the air thick with the scent of impending scandal. Within minutes, the guard returned, his face grim. He held a small velvet-lined box, and inside sat the glistening diamond ring. "I found it, sir," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "In the bin," just as the boy said. He handed the box to Mr. Kang. The CEO opened it, then slowly turned his gaze toward his daughter. The silence was absolute. So-young opened her mouth, her eyes darting frantically, looking for a way out, for a lie that would hold. "Father, it was a misunderstanding. I thought I saw her, Mr." Kang didn't let her finish. He simply shook his head, a gesture of finality that seemed to age him 10 years. "Get out of my sight," he whispered, "and don't bother returning to the firm or this home. You have disgraced us in a way that can never be undone." So-young turned and fled, her heels clicking frantically against the marble, the sound fading into the distance. Mr. Kang looked down at Thandiwe and Lindo. He looked weary, stripped of the arrogance that usually defined him. He didn't offer a platitude. He simply bowed his head, a gesture of profound respect that shocked everyone in the room. "I have failed as a host, and I have failed as a leader," he said to the room at large. "Thandiwe, please, forgive the way you have been treated in my home." He didn't wait for an answer. He walked toward the exit, leaving his guests in a state of stunned confusion. Thandiwe remained on the floor, holding her son, feeling the weight of the night begin to recede. She knew, with absolute clarity, that her life had changed forever. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a woman who had spoken her truth, and whose son had been the one to set the world right. If you felt that chill in your spine and want to see how Thandiwe rebuilds her life from the ashes, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We have so many more stories of truth, resilience, and unexpected justice waiting for you on this channel. And you don't want to miss a single second. Drop a comment below and tell me, did you have a feeling the toddler would be the one to save the day? I read every single one of your thoughts, and I can't wait to hear from you. The story is just beginning, and there is so much more to uncover. The morning after the gala, the Kang mansion was unnervingly quiet. Thandiwe moved through the halls like a ghost, the opulence that once felt suffocating now appearing small and fragile. Mr. Kang had been true to his word. By dawn, the legal team had arrived to settle the contracts, not to fire her, but to provide a severance and an apology that was, by any measure, life-changing. He sat in his study, the sunlight streaming in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, highlighting the gray in his hair. Thandiwe stood before him, Lindo tucked safely in the nursery with Mrs. Patton, the cook who had always been a quiet ally. "You don't have to stay," Mr. Kang said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "I know this place is poisoned for you now. I want to help you set up something of your own, something that doesn't involve serving anyone." Thandiwe felt a surge of gratitude, but beneath it, a sharp, cold resolve. "I want to start a center, Mr. Kang," she said, her voice steady. "A place where children like Lindo can be safe, and where mothers don't have to fear for their futures. A place where the truth is the most valuable currency, not the family name." The CEO looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. "A center for development? In Seoul? It won't be easy to find space. Thandiwe met his gaze. "I'm not looking for easy. I'm looking for a start." She left the room with the resources to begin, but the true prize was the silence that followed her departure. She walked to the nursery, where Lindo was playing with his lion, completely oblivious to the fact that he had brought a billion-dollar empire to its knees. She picked him up, holding him tight, the warmth of his small body a reminder that everything she had fought for was worth it. As she walked toward the gates of the estate, she noticed the other staff members watching her. There was no more looking through her. There was a quiet, deep-seated respect. She had done what none of them dared to do. She had stayed, she had fought, and she had won. She walked into the streets of Seoul, the city vibrant and alive, and for the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel like a stranger. She felt like a pioneer. She found a small, abandoned building in a quiet part of the city, a place that needed a lot of work but had good bones. She spent the next few months scrubbing, painting, and building, her hands calloused but her spirit lighter than it had been since leaving Johannesburg. Word spread quickly, not about the scandal, but about the woman who had walked out of the Kang mansion and started something of her own. Other mothers, women who had also been pushed to the edges of society, came to help. They brought paint, they brought books, they brought stories from their own lives. Thandiwe realized that she wasn't just building a center. She was building a community. She was creating a space where the truth couldn't be silenced by wealth or prestige. Every day, Lindo would play in the corner of the room, his presence a constant reminder of the day that changed everything. And every day, Mr. Kang would call, not to check on his business, but to see how the progress was going. He was, in his own way, learning to let go of the rigid structure of his life and embrace the unpredictable nature of genuine connection. The escalation of her new life didn't come without challenges. The media, hungry for any scrap of information about the Kang family scandal, kept trying to get to her. They swarmed the construction site, shoving microphones into her face, demanding to know what it was like to be the woman who exposed the heiress. Thandiwe kept her door locked. She didn't want the spotlight. She wanted the work. "I have nothing to say to you," she told a particularly aggressive reporter one afternoon. "My life is not a headline. It is a story of a mother and her son. If you want a story, go find someone who wants to be seen." She walked away, her back straight, leaving the reporters scrambling for comments she would never give. This, she realized, was true power, the ability to walk away from things that didn't serve her. It was a lesson she hadn't learned in the kitchen of the mansion, but one she was mastering every single day now. She sat on the floor with Lindo that evening, reading a book about the mountains of her homeland. "Mommy, will we go home?" Lindo asked, his eyes wide and curious. Thandiwe kissed his forehead. "We are home, Lindo. Home is where we are together, where we are safe, and where no one can tell us who we are allowed to be." She knew the path ahead wouldn't be simple. There were licenses to obtain, permits to navigate, and the lingering weight of her past. But as she looked at her son, she knew that she had already survived the worst of it. The hardest part was over, and the rest, she would build with her own 2 hands. If this journey is resonating with your own, please take a second to click that like button. It's the best way to tell us that you want more stories about strength and perseverance. And don't forget to comment. I read them all, and your feedback helps me craft the next chapter of these stories. Your support is the reason we can keep sharing these narratives of real people who face real battles. Let me know what you think about Thandiwe's transition. Would you have chosen to walk away as quickly as she did? By midsummer, the center was ready. It was bright, filled with the laughter of children and the smell of fresh coffee. Thandiwe stood at the front door on the opening morning, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. The local community had turned out in force. There were people from all walks of life, brought together by the promises of a safe space. She saw the faces of mothers who had once looked as tired as she had, now standing a little taller. She saw children, exploring the shelves of books, their eyes bright with curiosity. And then, standing at the back of the room, she saw Mr. Kang. He looked out of place in his tailored suit, but he was smiling, a genuine, relaxed expression that made him look a decade younger. He walked over to her, his movements hesitant. "It's beautiful, Thandiwe," he said, looking around the room. "You've done something truly remarkable here." Thandiwe nodded, her heart full. "I had a lot of help," she replied. She pointed to a group of women who were laughing near the craft table. "We all did." The day passed in a blur of activity. She spoke to parents, she organized activities, and she watched as her vision became a reality. But the highlight of the day was when a group of kids asked her to tell them a story about South Africa. She sat them down on the rug, and for the next hour, she transported them to the plains of her childhood, describing the heat, the music, and the resilience of the people she loved. She could see the parents listening from the doorway, their expressions softened by the simple, universal power of a story well told. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the center, Thandiwe felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She hadn't just survived the Kang mansion. She had learned from it. She had learned what she didn't want, and she had used that clarity to build exactly what she needed. She stood by the window, watching Lindo play, and she allowed herself to feel, just for a moment, the weight of everything she had endured. It was heavy, but it was also the foundation upon which she had built her new life. As she felt a presence behind her. It was Mr. Kang, who had stayed long after the others had left. "You're going to be a force, Thandiwe," he said. "People are going to pay attention to what you're doing here." Thandiwe looked at him, her gaze clear. "I'm not looking for attention, Mr. Kang. I'm looking for impact." He smiled, and this time there was no trace of his former self. "I think you've already started." They stood in silence for a while, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant, muffled noise of the city outside. It was a strange, unexpected friendship, built on the wreckage of a scandal and the shared recognition of the truth. As he left that evening, he stopped at the door. "If you ever need anything," he said, "you know where to find me." Thandiwe didn't answer right away. She didn't think she would need him. But she appreciated the offer. She was a woman who could stand on her own, and she knew it. She turned back to the room, looking at the books, the toys, and the empty space that would be filled again tomorrow. She felt a profound sense of gratitude for every turn of fate that had led her to this point. The struggle had been long and exhausting, but the view from this vantage point was worth it. She was no longer a servant, no longer a victim, and no longer waiting for someone else to grant her permission to be. She was the architect of her own life, and she was just getting started. She knew the road ahead would have its own obstacles, but she also knew that she had the strength, the resilience, and the community to overcome them. If this story has moved you, please consider sharing it with someone who needs a reminder that their circumstances do not define them. Your support means everything to us, and it helps us keep these stories in the spotlight. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming features. Before we go, I have to ask, what was the one moment in this story that truly hit you in the chest? Was it the confrontation in the ballroom, or the quiet strength Thandiwe showed afterward? Tell me in the comments. I'm looking forward to reading your perspective. The first winter at Center was bitter, the cold air biting at the windows of the small building. Thandiwe spent her days keeping the fires burning, both literally and figuratively. She saw the struggle in the faces of the families who relied on the center, and she worked tirelessly to keep the resources coming. She organized donation drives, she coordinated with local charities, and she kept the doors open, even when the funding was tight. It was a test of her resolve, but she had been through worse. She remembered the nights in the kitchen of the mansion, the uncertainty of her position, and the constant fear of losing her son. Compared to that, this was work she loved. One afternoon, a woman named Ji Young came to the center. She was terrified, her voice shaking as she told Thandiwe about her situation. She was a single mother, much like Thandiwe had been, and she was facing a similar crisis of confidence. Thandiwe listened, really listened, and she knew exactly how to help. She didn't just give her advice. She gave her a path. She showed her how to advocate for herself, how to find resources, and how to believe in her own capacity to overcome. It was a full circle moment. Thandiwe realized that the entire journey, every high and every low, had been a preparation for this. She wasn't just building a center. She was mentoring other women, helping them find their own strength. The center became a beacon, a place where people knew they would be heard, supported, and empowered. The Kang scandal faded into the past, replaced by the daily, quiet victories of the community she had helped build. She saw Lindo growing up, his confidence expanding with every day. He was a bright, articulate boy who had seen more of the world than most children his age, and he had come out of it with a sense of empathy that was rare. He was, she realized, her greatest teacher. He had taught her to be brave, to be honest, and to be present, no matter the circumstances. As the winter turned to spring, the center blossomed again. The garden was filled with flowers. Deduts were thrown open to the fresh air, and the laughter of the children was constant. Thandiwe stood on the porch one morning, looking out over the neighborhood. She had come so far, and she knew she had so much further to go, but she was ready. She was prepared, and she was surrounded by people who shared her vision. The story of the maid who stood up to a billionaire was no longer about a maid. It was about a woman who had dared to dream and had the strength to make it real. It was a story of hope, a story of transformation, and a story of truth. And as she went back inside to start her day, she knew that the best was yet to come. Thank you for being part of this journey. We've shared tears, triumphs, and the undeniable power of a mother's love. Your support fuels these stories. Please like this video if it touched your heart, and subscribe to join our growing family. Comment below with your biggest takeaway from Thandiwe's story, because your voice is what brings these tales to life. Stay tuned, because next week, we're back with another story that will leave you absolutely breathless. Until then, remember that no matter how loud the world gets, your truth is the only voice that truly matters.